Hey guys, my name is Nick and welcome back to the channel. Now, over the last few weeks I have noticed an increased number of comments in things like what glue I use when I'm assembling my miniatures. Now I thought what I'd do is I'll address that issue and every other hobby implement that I use in order to clean, paint, file, sand, you name it, whatever it is I'm using to make my miniatures. So what I do is I'm going to cut down onto a table down view and just run through pretty much every implement that I've amassed over the last 20 plus years. Some of this stuff is old and you probably can't get it anymore. Some of it is relatively new because I use it as a consumable and I go through it at a rate of knots. But I thought what I'd do is I'll go table down and just explain everything that I use in order to make, prepare and basically paint my miniatures. So let's get straight into the video. So here we go then, this is the collection of stuff that I use in order to prepare, paint and so on, all of the miniatures that you see on this channel. So let's sort of run through. It's going to be in no specific order, I'm just going to pick things up as we go along. So let's start with some paints. I use a different variety of paints, from Games Workshop's flip lid stuff to Game Air and to Game Colour from Vallejo. So those are my main go-to paints. I also have some Decal Fix stuff and some Decal Solvent. You can use Microsol, Microset, they are the industry leaders. I ran out of that and these were available at the time, so I've got some of that. And I've also got some Glaze Medium, which is basically Lamium Medium really, but it comes in a far bigger pot and it's a far cheaper solution. I use a number of different weathering effects from AK to MIG. So some rain streaks or some rust effects and so on. I use a various number and I find that MIG weathering stuff is pretty damn good. They also do some powdered stuff as well, so I've got some all kinds of different MIG products here. These I've had for years and that's how little that you actually use them. I use them very sparingly, but MIG weathering powders are pretty damn good, so I use a lot of their product. So while we're still talking some of that kind of thing, I've got some drying retarder, so this is specifically for acrylics. I also have some flow enhancer as well, again specific for acrylic, because acrylic paints is what you're going to be using in the most part on your miniatures. Now there are some people that do like to use some oil stuff as well, but in the most part it's all this. So that bottle there was some airbrush cleaner. Let's look at some of the paint brushes as well then. I've got some really old brushes. I don't even know where I've accumulated them from. It's just one of those things that you just end up with some really scabby old brushes. These are really good for mixing paint on palettes or scraping paint out of pot lids or whatever without damaging any of your decent brushes. I've got a couple of big brushes. That one I use for dusting my miniatures actually. So when you're cleaning them up and they're covered in mould lines or scrape lines or you've Dremeled them or whatever, I use that to sort of dust and clean them. I do use some Games Workshop stuff, very limited Games Workshop stuff. I do have their large shade brush and their dry brushes. When it comes to actual detail brushes though, I have a variety of different brands, mainly two brands, but I'm just branching into a third. So the first one is Rosemary & Co, the second one is the Windsor Series 7. Windsor Series 7 are quite expensive, they are probably the industry leaders still, and I've got a few of those kicking around. But if your budget doesn't stretch to Winsor & Newton, those Rosemary & Co ones, superb service. I think they come from Ireland and are really, really good. But I did mention I'm branching into a third brand, and that is from Artis Opus. Now these are relatively new. They were a Kickstarter backed and they're going to go on main release very soon. And I've got a selection of their brushes that came through. I haven't tested them yet, but I will be doing so very soon. Now they are supposed to be very equivalent to the Winsor & Newton stuff. Hobby grips are all the rage at the moment. I do have some Games Workshop Citadel ones for holding things. There are a number of different brands on the market, all do kind of the same thing, so it just depends on your price point. And some of them hold slightly bigger bases and some of them don't. Now when it comes to priming my miniatures, I am a big advocate of High Coat. I buy this en masse and it comes up to about £3 a can. And I think it is at least as good as the Games Workshop stuff. But costs you an awful lot less. But I do use the Games Workshop coloured cans. I have tried some things from Halfords or other car primers and I just don't find that they're anywhere near as good when it comes to miniatures. Now let's look at some more pots and things. I've got X20A thinner from Tamiya. I use that for thinning paints before it goes through my airbrush. And I also have some Badger needle juice here, which is basically a lubricant for airbrushing. It does come with a super lube as well, and I've had that for a long time, and as you can see, it's still, you know, 3/4 full. Now some other airbrushing tools. There's a little spanner here for removing the fluid head nozzle. Then I've got some airbrush cleaning equipment here, so I've got some various size brushes, and then also this little pointy thing, which is designed for cleaning out that fluid head nozzle that you've carefully removed with that spanner from earlier. Now it's one of the most important bits in an airbrush, so don't lose that. So just be really careful when you're taking your airbrush apart. So I've got another few bits of tools and so on. Pin vise drills, very, very useful. I've got a number of, well, I've got about 2 or 3 of these, which I keep with permanent drill bits in. Good for drilling out barrels or making holes for magnets and so on. I've got some cheap clippers. Games Workshop ones are equally as good, as long as they're flat-sided on one part, and they do blunt over time, but you need them for removing plastic from their frames. Also have a scalpel, which is I use for cleaning up all the plastic components. I don't have mould removal tools. I much prefer the scalpel approach, and I get all the spare blades and so on from eBay because they're really, really cheap. A number of different moulding tools. Now this is used for green stuff work. I've got all of those. I've had those for a long time. Very rarely do I need to use green stuff, mainly used for Forge World, and that's when those tools and these files come in as well. So a bunch of needle files in various different shapes. Now my green stuff I typically get from Green Stuff World. It's 6 times longer than the stuff you get from Games Workshop for the same price, so, you know, value there. Then I've got a hobby saw and a Stanley hacksaw as well. Very useful again. These are more for when you're working with resin and cutting gates and injection points off of Forge World stuff. I do have a Games Workshop little paint palette. I've found those to be really, really useful. I used to use an acrylic pot or a porcelain pot, and cleaning those was a pain in the arse, so I did replace those with these new palette pads, and they are really, really good. I actually surprised myself with how good they were. There's a couple of clamps as well floating around, so I have some grips and clamps for holding things while they dry. Then we've got some varnishes. I use Dale Rowney matte and gloss. These I've had for probably 4 or more years, and yeah, you can see there I'm running a bit low on the gloss varnish. I'm going to have to top those up, but 4 years worth of use, superb stuff. And we can have a look at some brush soap. Now, if you're buying expensive brushes and you want to make sure they last as long as possible, brush soap is an essential purchase. Now on top of that, let's actually address the big question that I've had, is what glue I use. Now, this is Revell Professional Contactor Glue. I buy this from Amazon. I think I get it for 3 pots of this for about £9 including shipping. If you're an Amazon Prime user, you'll get it next day. And then my super glue of choice is Gorilla Super Glue Gel. I've never had a single problem with that stuff. But for the big jobs in the world, everyone who's watched my channel before knows I love this stuff. It's JB World. This for Forge World is an essential ingredient, and it's really good if you're going to be magnetising anything, because this stuff is just awesome. A large pot of PVA glue, I picked that up from Builders Merchants. That's like £5 for that giant blob of glue. That always comes in useful. Cotton buds for cleaning stuff. Now I do run 2 lots of tissue. I have regular kitchen roll, but I also have this large industrial style tissue that I get from Costco, I think. And it's, if you're in a house, in a relationship, and you using kitchen roll is actually very expensive. I use that purely for when I'm cleaning my brushes for dry brushing purposes, but all other cleaning purposes I use that large roll. Big stack of blue tack, can't go wrong with blue tack. So there we go then guys, that is pretty much all the hobby implements, tools, accessories and so on that I use. As I said, I have amassed them over a large period of time, so if you're just getting into this hobby, you know, don't rush out and buy all this stuff. It's one of those things where you just amass it over time. Like a man shed or a man drawer in the house where you've got things like drachma and francs and so on, and dead batteries and whatever. You just amass stuff over time, and you do find that some things you use a lot, some things you don't use a lot, and you just hoard stuff eventually. But it all comes in use at some point, and you think, you know what, I need this sharp proddy stick to do something with, and you've got one. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I shall catch you guys on the next video.